Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is that you're watching this, which is called What's Left. I'm your host. My name's Larry Erickson, and for the next 25 or 30 minutes, I'm going to be going on about a number of different things, and I hope you'll find them interesting enough to stay with us for that time. If you have any reactions to the show, feel free to email me directly. This is my personal email here, whoviating@AOL.com. And if you didn't catch that, you can always go to my website, which is called Lotus Surviving a Dark Time. The URL will be over here a couple of times during the show. And you can get the email address from there if you didn't write it down, or you can leave a comment there if you'd rather do that. If you do send me email, please, as always, to requests, include something in the subject line so I know this is not spam. And to be a little patient about getting an answer. So with that, let's get going. I always like to start with some good news, and I got a couple of bits this week, so it's a good way to start off. The first was a surprise bit of news. The House Appropriations Committee has inserted into the 2018 military spending bill a provision that would repeal the AUMF, the authorization to use military force. This is the provision that was passed during the political panic that occurred in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, and that has been used to justify every U.S. military adventure since. The AUMF authorized the president to take whatever action he, and it did say he deems necessary against any nation, organization, or individual which he finds responsible in any way, direct or indirect, for 9/11. It specified no target and set no time limit. Representative Barbara Lee, who was, she introduced this amendment to repeal the AUMF. She was the only person in Congress to vote against the original version of it back in 2001, saying as she did so that it was an unacceptable blank check for all future presidents. Now, considering that the Congressional Research Service has found that the AUMF has been used more than 37 times to justify military action in 14 different countries, and it's was even used by the amazing Mr. O to justify the war against ISIS and the involvement in Syria, even though ISIS did not even exist on 9/11, it's clear that Lee's concerns have been clearly justified. The amendment would repeal the AUMF 240 days after enactment of the 2018 military budget of which it's part. That allows Congress plenty of time to come up with a new one if it wants to do so, which Lee says is actually part of the point. Forcing Congress to actually debate, actually decide, actually take some responsibility for our wide-ranging wars. Now, the amendment's chances of surviving in the Senate are slim. In fact, even getting to the House is questionable, what with the House Foreign Affairs Committee whining about committee jurisdiction. But in a way, it doesn't matter. What matters for right now is that not only did this pass on a bipartisan voice vote with only one objection, some of the lawmakers on both sides applauded when it was passed, clearly indicating that there is, at least among some, a growing frustration with our unending wars. And while that frustration is still well short of where we want to be, it's still good news. All right, another bit of good news. This one's about the environment. On July 3rd, a three-judge panel of the Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia ruled that EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt had overstepped his authority in trying to delay implementation of an Obama-era rule requiring oil and gas companies to monitor and reduce methane leaks. Administrator Pruitt had announced in April that he would delay by 90 days the deadline for oil and gas companies to comply with the rule, saying the agency would use the time to reconsider the measure, and then said in June he was actually extending that delay for 2 years. The court disagreed with Pruitt's contention that industry groups had not had sufficient opportunity to comment, and also said that Pruitt had no authority to make what the court called the unreasonable, arbitrary, and capricious decision to delay the rule from taking effect. Now, the reason this decision is important is that methane is by volume about 20 times more potent a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide is. And environmental groups have been long contending that actual methane emissions, both from leaks and from intentional venting at fossil fuel operations, that the actual volume of methane being released is far higher than what's being reported. Environment hater and fossil fuel industry lapdog Scott Pruitt has been trying as hard as he can to undo the environmental gains of the past several decades. This time, at least, he got smacked down hard, and that is good news. Finally, for now, some good news on another topic which we've talked about a lot, LGBTQ rights. The German parliament has voted to approve same-sex marriage by a vote of 393 to 226. Chancellor Angela Merkel, the recent liberal hero because of her apparent dislike for Donald TheRump, voted against the measure on the hoary grounds that marriage is one man and one woman. But to her credit, and doubtless aware of the fact that polls say that 83% of Germans are in favor of same-sex marriage, to her credit, she released the members of her party to vote their consciences. And even though only about a quarter of them did vote for the measure, still that was enough to produce the 2-to-1 margin by which it passed. Germany thus joins more than a dozen other European nations in recognizing the right of same-sex marriage, and it's hoped that passage in Germany will build momentum towards that end in other German-speaking nations such as Switzerland and Austria. Unfortunately, on this same topic of LGBTQ rights, we also have some not good news. Same-sex marriage was not legal in Texas in 2013. Nonetheless, at that time, the city of Houston began extending the same spousal benefits it provided to married employees to employees who were partners in same-sex marriages who were married in a state where that was legal at the time. Well, two people in Houston, backed by a group that opposes same-sex marriage, sued the city, claiming that those benefits amounted to using taxpayer money to fund illegal activities. The trial court agreed and issued an injunction against the city. But after Obergefell v. Hodges, which was the U.S. Supreme Court decision that recognized the right of same-sex marriage across the country, after that, a Texas appeals court overturned the trial court decision, canceled the injunction, finding that under Obergefell, same-sex couples were entitled to equal treatment. But now, on June 30th, the Texas Supreme Court has reversed the appeals court and thrown the whole thing back to the trial court to start all over again. In a unanimous decision, the court declared that because Obergefell did not explicitly and in so many words say that, quote, states must provide the same publicly funded benefits to all married persons, that meant that the reach and ramifications of Obergefell are still being debated. In short, the Texas Supreme Court has ruled that just because we have to let you get married like any other couple doesn't mean we have to treat you like any other married couple, and we can still discriminate against you because we just don't like you. It's worth noting at this point that the all-gopper Texas State Supreme Court initially refused to take up the case, leaving the appeals court decision intact, until it got grief from the upper echelons of the GOP hierarchy in Texas, which in essence effectively ordered the court to take the matter up, which the court did, but upon doing so, and doing as it was told, still tried to maintain some shred of judicial dignity. But to show just how bizarre this ruling was and how the justices must know how stunningly wrong they are, they tried to prove that the reach and ramifications of Obergefell are still being worked out by pointing to two recent actions of the U.S. Supreme Court. The first was taking up the case of that baker who refused to make a wedding cake for a same-sex couple. which actually has nothing to do with spousal benefits and isn't really even about same-sex marriage. It's really about whether or not being a religious bigot frees you from the obligations of civil rights laws. But the second was reversing a ruling by the Arkansas Supreme Court that kept married same-sex couples from being treated the same as opposite-sex couples on their children's birth certificates. The High Court said it reversed because, quote, the differential treatment infringes Obergefell's commitment to provide same-sex couples the constellation of benefits that the states have linked to marriage, which apparently directly contradicts the Texas court's claim that Obergefell allows for differential treatment. The only good thing here is that I'm confident that once this gets into federal court, it will be dealt with quickly and in short measure. It's only too bad that the bozos, bigots, and buffoons who have pursued it can't be made to offer some compensation for the pain and the frustration which they have caused. All right, next up right now, it is one of our regular features. This is the Clown Award, given as always for meritorious stupidity. And oh, we had some fun this week. We had a veritable plethora of possibilities. In fact, we had so many that I can't go through them all. I'm just going to have to give you a couple of highlights. There was, of course, for one, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, who was determined to prove that his historically low approval rating of 15% is actually higher than he deserves. He was involved in a budget impasse with the state legislature, and as part of that, he ordered state-owned beaches to be shut down for the July 4th weekend. And then he went to a beach at a house which is set aside for use of the governor. Then when he was asked as a news conference if he'd gotten any sun, he said, no, I didn't get any sun today. Then when pictures of him on the beach went viral, a representative for him said he meant that he had a baseball hat on. That's why he didn't get sun. Then finally, when cornered, Christie said that people who are upset about him being such an ass about this should run for governor because, you see, being governor makes him really special, which makes him certainly a worthy contender for the Clown Award. But then there was also Fox News commentator Lisa Kennedy Montgomery. Faced with reports about how people will die if the Rump Care is passed, dumping millions of people off health insurance and so restricting their access to health care, she responded, this is no big deal and who cares because we're all gonna die. But the winner was a last-minute entry. So the big red news this week goes to Donald the Rump supporters. For the past 29 years, National Public Radio's Morning Edition has observed the 4th of July by having the show's host reporters, newscasters, and commentators, and so on, read the Declaration of Independence. This year, NPR also tweeted out the Declaration, 140-character line by 140-character line. So what happened? Backers of the Rump, who I suppose we might call them the Rumpers, backers of the Rump, who usually can be found ritually chanting "Make America Great Again," interspersed with accusations that anybody to their left is un-American, they did not recognize the Declaration of Independence. And instead, they accused NPR of calling for revolution, condoning the violence of the left, of course, and pushing biased propaganda and trash, while references to George III as an unworthy leader were taken as code for the Rump. Even when people pointed out the source document for NPR's tweets, the Rumpers still claimed it was all bias on the part of NPR. In other words, to them, the Declaration of Independence is anti-the Rump propaganda, which, when you think about it, may not be that far off. The Rumpers, maybe not all of them, but certainly more than enough of them, total clowns. And we're taking a break. And here we are back again, and we are back with our other regular feature. This is the Outrage of the Week. The poorest country in the Middle East is Yemen, and it has been in a bloody civil war since late 2014. Now, I'm not even going to try to disentangle the history of this war. I'm just going to note that the actual current round of fighting broke out when Houthi rebels seized control of Sana'a, the Yemeni capital, in September 2014. A few months later, they seized the presidential compound, forcing President Adraba Mansur Hadi to flee the country in late February 2015. Since then, the fighting between supporters of the Hadi government on the one side, with outside help coming from the U.S. in the form of drone strikes and from Saudi Arabia via a blockade and air campaign, and the Houthi on the other, with outside aid from Iran, has continued, and the fighting has gotten more vicious over time. Despite the ongoing brutality and suffering, neither side has gained a decisive advantage. What has happened is that upwards of 10,000 people have died in this war, a war that the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs calls the Forgotten War. The health service in Yemen has completely collapsed. Healthcare workers have not been paid. They've been working without pay for over 6 months. UNICEF reports that of the total population of 27 million people, an estimated 21.2 million, or around 80% of the total population, need humanitarian assistance of some kind. Half of that number are children. Of that 27 million, 3.3 million, well over 10%, have been driven from their homes. Around 17 million of that number in the country are food insecure, which means they don't know from one day to the next whether or not there'll be food to eat. 6.8 million of them are one step away from famine. There are 1.5 million malnourished children in the country, 370,000 of them severely malnourished. And over 2/3 of the people of Yemen lack access to safe drinking water, which has led in turn to the worst outbreak of cholera in the world, an outbreak that is getting worse by almost any measure. By the end of June, there were nearly 250,000 reported cases of cholera in Yemen, with thousands more every week. 1,500 people have already died, more die every day. And let's be absolutely clear right now, let's be absolutely clear about two things. One, as noted in April by Idris Jaziri, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and International Sanctions, it is the air and sea blockade imposed on Yemen by Saudi Arabia that is the biggest single cause of this humanitarian catastrophe. That blockade has restricted and disrupted the import of food, fuel, medical supplies, and humanitarian assistance. At the same time, Saudi Arabia has also been carrying on a campaign of airstrikes, over 1/3 of which have been against civilian targets, such as schools, hospitals, markets, and mosques. An air war that is responsible for the destruction of the infrastructure of Yemen, which has led to the hunger and the cholera. Saudi Arabia, that is, has been engaged in a pattern of war crimes in Yemen. And two, this would not be possible without the collusion of the United States. We are actively abating and enabling war crimes in Yemen. We're the ones who sell the Saudis the jets and the bombs. We're the ones who helped with intelligence. We're the ones who provided them with precision-guided weapons on the idea this would help them to avoid civilian casualties, only to, after discovering that the Saudis were using them to better target civilian targets, we still have now approved sending an additional $500 million in precision-guided weapons to the Saudis after an attempt in the Senate a couple of weeks ago to block the sale failed on a vote of 53-47. The aid we give, in fact, is even more direct. As Senator Chris Murphy pointedly noted during the debate over that arms sales, the Saudis simply could not operate this bombing campaign without us. Not only do we sell them the weapons, not only do we stand side by side with them as they consider possible targets, but their planes can't fly without U.S. refueling capacity. The Saudi air war, the Saudi crimes that result from that air war could not happen without us. We are involved. We are guilty. We are guilty of war crimes in Yemen. There is a move now in the House to bar the U.S. from refueling Saudi planes. Frankly, while a worthy effort, the chances of that passing Congress and surviving an inevitable veto are probably negligible. So the result is that day after day, we are guilty of war crimes in Yemen. And the White House is prepared to encourage that. And the Congress, it appears, is prepared to stand by and let it happen. And that is an outrage. All right, we're going to finish up with this. The show is on the week after the 4th of July, and as is typical for me, I forgot about the holiday until after it had happened, so I didn't talk about the 4th last week, which is when I should have done it. But we're still here, so let me just say I hope you enjoyed your 4th of July. I hope you got to see some fireworks. I hope you got to spend time with family or friends, or better yet, both. And what with the 4th being on Tuesday and all, I hope you actually got an extra day off for the beach or barbecue or baseball or whatever. So, as we are still kind of in the afterglow of the 4th of July, I wanted to end on this. Quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their powers, their just powers, from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute a new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light or transient causes. And accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security." Those words should form the backdrop against which the 4th is seen. Our national holiday should not be a time for celebrating the status quo or for patting ourselves on the back in an orgy of national self-congratulation, but rather a time to re-examine and rediscover the truly revolutionary heritage which America has. Even more than that, it should be a time to rededicate ourselves to the ideas and ideals of that declaration, to recognize that it is, as the Declaration itself says, our right and our duty to resist invasion of our unalienable rights. It is our duty to resist the CIA, the FBI, and the NSA when they try to poke, prod, pry, and probe into every secret of our private lives. It is our duty to resist attempts to muzzle, restrict, intimidate, and otherwise restrain freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, and freedom of speech. It is our duty to resist a militarist U.S. foreign policy that is at war in multiple nations, and to resist a militarist U.S. federal budget that proposes to spend an overall total of $825 billion on the military next fiscal year, while human needs go unmet and are cut back. It is our duty to resist government policies that favor big business at the expense of the general public, that favor the rich over the poor, the haves over the have-nots. We here at What's Left do not believe in violence, but we do believe in revolution, nonviolent revolution. And we believe that we are fully within the revolutionary heritage of America when we say we believe it is our duty to demand our rights and our duty to make the changes necessary to secure those rights for ourselves and for all others. Our heritage as Americans includes a great many idealistic values, but the conservative appeal is to the worst in our heritage, to selfishness, to suspicion, to what's in it for me, for fear. which actually raises something I've been meaning to talk about, sort of as a sidebar, but I do want to talk about this briefly, because it's something that not only divides the left and the right, I think it actually helps to determine whether you wind up on the left or the right in your life. It's called reification, and it's the ability to perceive an abstraction as a reality. It's often described in negative terms, like using examples, people who convince themselves Sherlock Holmes is a real person or that Hogwarts is a real place. But it also means having the ability to see the physical reality behind statistics. Consider health insurance, the fact that 22 million people will lose their health coverage as a result of the latest version of TheRump care. Now, to the right, that's a number, it's a statistic, it's a politically unfortunate statistic to be explained away, yes, but it's still a statistic. To the left, it's 22 million actual, breathing, living human beings who will have less access to health care and therefore be at risk of dying years before they should. That ability to see that 22 million as actual people, that is reification, and that is an ability which the left far exceeds the right. Put bluntly, the right's vision of reality is constrained by the selfish devotion to me and mine above all else, because that ability to reify limits their sense of connection to a broader world. That's why they'll speak of the personal but never the public, of self but never of others, of us and them but never we, of family but never of community. In fact, they're incapable of talking of community because that talks about commitments to a wider range than their immediate lives. And so they actually reject the concept of community. But we here not only affirm community, we celebrate it. Instead of rejecting community, what we reject is the right of so few to have so much when so many have so little. What we resist is the power of so few to control so much when so many control so little. What we ultimately affirm is the right of every human being to a decent life, free of hunger, fear, and oppression. What we ultimately demand from our society is the effort to guarantee that right. Because we've no desire to place a ceiling over anyone's aspirations. What we want to do is put a floor under everyone's needs. Because compassion is not a cliche. Decency isn't for case-by-case convenience, and justice is not a prerogative of the powerful. See, we don't dream of perfection, of idealized utopias, but of simple human justice, justice in its truest sense, economic, social, and political. A justice that rejects the ascendancy of bombs over bread, of private greed over public good, of profits over people, of the powerful few over the disadvantaged many, and of the powerful many over the disadvantaged few. We look for a justice that centers on the preciousness of life and will fight to maintain and expand that preciousness. That sort of justice won't come easily, it won't come cheaply, it won't be convenient, but it is possible. And after all is said and done, it's just the only right thing to do. This is our banner the radical, nonviolent American left carries for the 4th of July. It declares justice, compassion, community for the next American Revolution. That's it for this week. We are done. We are out of here. We will see you next week. So in the meantime, you enjoy your summer. You have the best week you possibly can. And as always, peace.